4 exam domain. So let's start. The first domain will be the secure architecture. So here we are having a 10 questions regarding a secure architectures. So here the options are: create IAM users in every account with the custom policy, use AWS organization with the SCP and a permission set assigned by AWS IAM identity centers, share a root credentials for a dev and production separately, create a one IAM role per developer in each account manually. So, so the answer will be B. See why? IAM identity, like IAM identity organization of the SCP, having the permission for to assign the rules and all. So with the permission that combined with the organization and guardians and centrally manage the access across the many accounts without per account manual IAM user setup. So that's why the answer will be the B. Let's go to the next slide. Company needs to encrypt the data in S3 bucket and wants to full control over the encryption key rotation, schedule, and access policy without managing key material itself. Which option meets this? SSES3, SSEC, SSEKMS with a custom managed key, client-side encryption with a locally generated key. So answer will be C, SSC CMS with the customer managed key, because SSC KMS with a customer managed key gives the customer control over the policies, rotations, and auditing via CloudTrail. So while the AWS still manages the underlying key materials, we use SSNEKMS for encrypting the data in S3 bucket and wants a full control access. This is the clue in the question. So we can go with the option C. Let's start with the third question. The application running on a EC2 instance temporarily credentials to call other AWS services, and company wants to avoid storing any long-term access keys on the instance. What should the architect use? Store IAM user access keys in an environment variable, attach an IAM rule to the EC2 instance profile, hardcode credentials in the application, store credentials in the public S3 bucket. We can go with the option B, attach an IAM rule to the EC2 instance profile, because the IAM rule attached via instance profile and supplies a temporarily automatically rotated credentials to the instance with no long-term keys to manage. So we can go with the option B for this question, because here the company wants to avoid storing any long-term access keys. Okay, and instance profile is not storing that long-term access keys. Question number 4, a company must ensure that no S3 bucket in the company can ever be made public, even by accident, across all the current and future bucket. What is the simplest way to enforce this account wide? Manual review every bucket ACL weekly. Enable S3 bucket public access to the account level. Delete the S3 bucket policy on each bucket. Use CloudTrail to detect public buckets after the fact. So the answer will be again B. Enable S3 block public access. Why? Because the account can never be a public, and even by the accident across all current and future buckets. So the S3 block public access configured at the account level overrides by any bucket policy on ACL that would made a bucket public, including the bucket created later. So we have to go with the S3 block public access at the account level. A company wants to detect malicious and unauthorized activity across the AWS accounts, ac- such as unusual API calls or compromised credentials using a machine learning based threat detection. Which service should it use? AWS Config, Amazon Guard DT, AWS Trusted Advisor, or Amazon Inspector? So it will go with the guard duty because config is we use for the configurations and all. Trusted advisor we use for the access key and the public access. Here we asking to detect the malicious and unauthorized activity across the AWS account, such as unusual API calls and compromised credentials using a machine learning based threat detection. So we can go with the Amazon guard duty. Let's come to the next question. A company runs a web application behind the application load balancer and wants to protect it against a common web exploits like a SQL injection and the cross-site scripting. Which service we should use? AWS Seal Standard, AWS WAF, Security Groups Only, or Amazon Mac? So I would always suggest whenever we have to protect against a web common exploits like an SQL injection and cross sites, HTTP and HTTPS, we can go with the firewall. So AWS firewall lets you create a rules that filter a web request based on the patterns like SQL injection and XXS, and it's attached directly to the load balancer, CloudFront, and API gateway. So this service will be helpful. Next question. A company stores a sensitive customer PII in S3 and wants to automatically discover and classify the sensitive data across all its buckets. Which service should it use? Amazon Mapping, AWS Config, Amazon Inspector, AWS Artifact. We can go with the Amazon Mapping because AWS Mackie uses machine learning to automatically discover, classify, and report on sensitive data such as PII and stored in S3. So we can go with AWS Mackie for this service. Let's go to the next question. The security team wants a full history of the configuration changes to AWS resources over time to support a compliance audits. Which service provide this? AWS CloudTrail, AWS Config, AWS CloudWatch, or AWS Trusted Advisor? So we can go with the AWS config. See, because here we are asking about the configuration changes to the AWS resources and the records and tracks of the configuration history and the compliance state of the resources over time, distinct from the cloud trail, which logs API calls is recording on the cloud trail. So we will not go with the cloud trail. We go with the AWS config. The question number 9, the company wants to restrict which VPC and IAM entities can access a specific S3 bucket regardless of individual object permission. What is the best mechanism? S3 policy with an VPC endpoint condition, S3 versioning, S3 transfer acceleration, S3 intelligent tiering. So I would go with the S3 bucket policy with the and VPC endpoint connection because here we are restricting, wants to restrict which VPC and IMTC can access in a specific S3 bucket. So for like whenever the bucket policy with the condition of AWS source VPC or AWS source VPC restrict access to the request coming through the specific endpoint, so regardless the object level of ACL we can use, so the best mechanism we can go with the S3 bucket policy. A company wants to centralize to store and rotate database credentials automatically and inject them into the application code without hard coding secrets. What should it use? AWS System Manager parameters store secure string only. AWS Secret Manager with the automatic rotation. Environment variable in the EC2 launch template. A private S3 bucket storing a credential file. Here we want a centralized way to store and rotate database credential. We want a centralized way. So whenever a centralized way is there, we can go with the option B, because the Amazon Secret Manager natively supports the automatic credential rotations to support databases and APIs and integrated with the application SDK to avoid a hard code secret. The Secret Manager will be the writer.